behind-the-scenes look at what it's like for a woman working on the sports beat. That and more next on a special edition of Carpe Diem. Hello and welcome to Carpe Diem. I'm Marc Rosenweig, Associate Professor in the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. The drive for equality for women in sports is an ongoing effort, often with mixed results. Progress has been slow at times and there are still challenges for women who are sports journalists. We discussed these issues during a panel at the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center on the MSU campus. Our panel included WABC-TV sports anchor and reporter Laura Behnke, SI.com staff writer Emily Kaplan, and MSU assistant professor and former USA Today sports reporter Kelly Whiteside. In part two of our discussion, I asked Emily Kaplan what her experience was like as a Penn State student covering the Penn State football scandal for the Associated Press.
Surreal. I think the biggest thing for me was that when I looked at Penn State, and at the time I was a junior, I was stringing for the Associated Press, which at the time was this cool job where you go to basketball games and get quotes and sometimes get to write 500-word stories, and that's kind of what I signed up for. And then all of a sudden it shifted to knocking on Joe Paterno's door the day he was fired and asking him for a quote for the AP main story. So when I say surreal, that's kind of what I'm talking about. But the kind of divide was that I was financially tied to the institution. I was a junior. I'm paying this place all of this money to get this education and the reputation that that degree would hold, and I'm not quite sure what that reputation would be in 2 years or kind of what people would look at my institution considering all of these things that had allegedly happened at the time. It was all kind of still unfolding. But working with the Associated Press was great in that it's, as you know, with the AP, it's just clear news. It's kind of to the point. I learned a ton about hard news and kind of how to get stories on deadline and how to kind of develop sources and things like that. When you talk about hands-on experience, I don't think many, if any, students kind of get that. And it was really unique and trying time and learning on the go. And, the most meta thing about it is that I would, go during the day or go at night and kind of report on these things. And then in the morning, I would go to like journalism ethics class and like talk about this. And it was just surreal.
How difficult of a juggling act was it for you, though, to be doing that, to be being student during the day and later in the day being the reporter? In a sense, you were kind of covering yourself. I mean, yeah. What kind of conflict or challenge did that pose, and how did you deal with it? Well,
I will say that I think that was the first time in my 4 years at Penn State I was ever on Dean's List. I think I really maybe I just needed extracurriculars to make me focus on my studies, but I did very well that semester. But yeah, it was weird, when you'd walk to class, there'd be a CNN camera trying to, get man on the street and, mug students saying, what do you think? And, kind of get them to say something salacious. And, when I was out, no, of course not, but they were asking my peers. And it was weird. There's just a lot going on, and a lot of the biggest issues I had and what I learned and took away from it was kind of helicopter journalism and people kind of coming into the town and saying, well, this is the way things are. I'm like, no, it's not. You can't paint a picture. You've only been here 48 hours. And for me, when I've gone on to my career, I've learned that. And, I was recently at Duke University for a scandal there, and I pledged myself I won't be like some of the national people that swooped in and kind of made assumptions.
Kelly, isn't that a problem that too many people today are parachuted into stories and they don't really have the lay of the land and they're under pressure to deliver something quickly to a website or to social media?
Yeah, it is. And it's the nature of the beast. I mean, I don't think there's any way around it. When you have an unfolding scandal, you do have to parachute in and do your best and hopefully not jump to conclusions and do as thorough reporting as you possibly can. And what complicates the whole situation is social media. And the Penn State situation is a clear example of some of the issues that happened, even reporting Joe Paterno's death before it happens.
Yeah.
So
and that cost
you know,
a couple of people their jobs because there was
definitely
a false tweet by a student who was working on a website there, and then it was retweeted by somebody from CBSSports.com, and they both lost their jobs.
Right. Yeah, and you know, you don't get anything more serious than reporting somebody that died. So I mean, it's just so many journalistic lessons to be learned from that case in regard to social media and helicoptering in.
Laura, what's your view as somebody who covered that story from afar, as far as how you and your colleagues handle it? Did you have discussions about that story? Were you tempted to go there?
Local news is kind of a different animal. We don't necessarily deal so much in breaking news, investigating news, anything like that. We have such a very small amount of time. I have a 3 to 4, 5-minute sportscast on the weekends, but we've got a little amount of time. We've got 9 professional sports teams here, and that's not even counting the soccer. There's a lot going on here. It's not necessarily our job to get into things like that. So we would just report what was being already reported and what the major headlines were. Though the way it affected us the most is that it became more, it was a news story, not just a sports story. So our news department did want that in our regular newscasts. And so, then, and you do it a little bit differently in a newscast, in the news part than you do in sports. So that was really the only way, we don't have the luxury, unfortunately, it's just the nature of local news to be getting too much into anything. So news always wants things, our news department especially always wants things to be kind of crazy and as sensationalized as you can get without crossing the lines, whereas we tend to be a little bit more conservative within sports. So that would have been the only area that we dealt with. They would attack, go after the tweets or the latest headlines that were the most salacious, and then, we need to follow up on that, and we'd temper it down a little bit if we felt it needed to be, but for the most part, we were not in it in any way like Emily was.
Speaking of which, Emily, take us to that scene as a reporter outside the front door of Joe Paterno's home. What was that scene like? I read an account that you wrote that I think Peter King posted back then, talking about that well-known quote now where Joe Paterno comes out and he says to the students, I guess, who were there, go study.
Right.
In other words, that's more important than what I'm going to say or do or whatever. But take us there for a minute, and as a reporter, what are your thoughts about it today?
Well, because I was stringing for the Associated Press, and at the time they brought in a lot of their national folks. They had their one main New York sports writer. They had their Philadelphia news writer. There was a big team of AP writers. So clearly, as the student stringer, I'm kind of bottom on their list. And that was the night of the Board of Trustees meeting. So all the big wigs are there, and my lovely assignment was to stay outside Joe Pa's house in my car in 10-degree weather, and I was pissed and upset, and I'm sitting there, and then all of a sudden I get a phone call from the Philly news desk, and it was Joe Paterno was fired, knock on his door. And I'm the only person there, and meanwhile, I'm sure you've seen the accounts of kind of this mayhem and this weird scene at the Board of Trustees, and people, visibly getting upset and going loud, and here I am in this quiet cul-de-sac with Joe Paterno's house. It's dark. So I'm there, and the Philly news editor is still on the phone with me, and he's giving me instructions of how not to get arrested for trespassing. Keep in mind, I think I'm 19 at the time. And so, they give me the instructions to play up the student card. If you see Sue, tell her that you're a student there, and this and that. So I did as I was told. I knocked on the door. Sue answered. We're not going to have a comment. So I said, okay. I kind of lingered there a little longer. And at that time, a couple students had come, natural progression, and that's where they wanted to go. And I stuck around, and I was the only reporter there. I think CNN got there a little bit after me. But so he came out, and the first remarks he made publicly, he told the kids to go study, and then the quote that I called in was, I'm not the coach anymore, and that's something I've got to get used to. And that quote was in the AP story the next day. So that's kind of how it unfolded.
And of course, share with our students the sensitivities. In other words, you go to somebody's door, it's, the situations are different, the stories are different, the characters are different each time, but it's like we talk to students when you go to cover a family that's been hit by a tragedy, like someone died in a plane crash or whatever. What goes through your mind as a reporter, and please all respond to this, as to how you should handle it as far as sensitivity.
I was just talking about this with a colleague when I was working on a story. I think it's referenced Duke, and it was an alleged sexual assault, and there was 2 women who said they were raped by a member of the men's basketball team, but they never went forward to authorities. And the colleague and I are texting. He's a college basketball writer, so he kind of knows things, and he goes, have you found the women yet? I said, I haven't. I think I have their names. I'm trying to contact them. I feel a little weird. And he goes, the worst thing about this business is tracking down victims. And it's so true. And a lot of times, we are just trying to chase down the story and chase down, the key players in it. But you have to remember that these are real people going through real events. And these 2 women, they're alleging that somebody sexually assaulted them, which is, the worst violation of, humanity. And, for me to kind of track them down, let alone the fact that they were students, it's really tricky, is kind of what I'm trying to get at. And a lot of the times, the way I try to handle it is just remember they're human beings, and just remember it's like a person-to-person conversation. And there's so many people who kind of, they demand things of sources. You need to tell me this, because I'm a journalist and I need to get the news. And you have to tread careful waters.
There has been a lot of coverage the last couple of years about domestic violence, abuse, so on. Certainly the controversies involving the NFL, Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson, and so on. Kelly, what's the quality of coverage of these stories, do you think, across the board on the sports beat?
Well, I think it's gotten significantly better, and it sort of had no choice to get better. The way the season unfolded with the whole Ray Rice situation in September, it was a national discussion, and that's what's great about sports, even in, difficult stories like that, whether it's sexual assault or domestic violence, it elevates, a societal issue to the forefront where you have the entire country talking about this because of the impact of sports and the NFL. And I think, reporters learned a lot. It's not a new issue, but we covered it in such a grand scale for the first time. And I think the perspective that women, and specifically female sports writers, brought to the discussion was significant. There was a lot of criticism of Janae Rice, and in terms of the victimization of women in this situation, I think female reporters brought a different perspective to the discussion. And while people didn't agree with necessarily Janae Rice's response, some female reporters kind of took a step back and said, this is sort of a pattern of response when it comes to domestic violence victims. It's not necessarily that she's trying to protect him, but I think it was an important discussion too in terms of criticism of the NFL and Roger Goodell. And if anybody remembers that press conference, the conversation and the questions posed by Rachel Nichols of CNN were really targeted and specific. And not to say that a male reporter wouldn't have brought those questions up.
Question. I don't know. Is that true? Do you think a man would have asked those probing questions of Roger Goodell on this type of issue? I
think it's, the blanket statement, I don't think you could say, men wouldn't bring that up. But I think it's significant that a woman did bring it up. And the fact that she kept on it, in the 2 press conferences, she kept on it.
I think just as significant was his response, which
right.
I found wholly inappropriate, and kind of the tone that he took with her. And that, I think, was almost as telling as kind of the questions that she asked.
Right.
Well, yeah, not even necessarily would a man have asked those questions, but would he have responded that way to
exactly.
a man?
That's
probably
not. That's a good point too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Laura, what about the use of social media to cover stories and also to inform your audience and so on? We had an instance, speaking of the continuing fallout from Penn State, where Keith Olbermann engaged in, shall we say, inappropriate tweets with a Penn State student. Some of it was a misunderstanding, but then he went too far about criticizing students who are actually raising money for cancer research. I know I'm oversimplifying the story.
No, but at least you read it.
Yeah. But what's your experience with social media as a reporting tool, but also as a way to get information And how do you verify these things, et cetera?
I both love and hate Twitter, sometimes at the exact same time. What I love about it is that, especially for me, is covering all of the different teams and all of the different sports that we have locally, and knowing that I can't be there. For most of these teams, I can show up only every once in a while. I can follow every single beat writer of every single one of our teams, national writers, everything. And, you know, first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I check Twitter to see what happened while I was sleeping, and to find out, you know, throughout the day, what's going on, what is Derek Fisher saying in his press conference right now that I'm not at. I love that aspect of it. In television, we have kind of a unique situation, since it's our faces that are out there. And so it's very much a personality driven, even though we are giving the facts and it's not necessarily giving our opinions. It's still a personality, and people do look at us, which leads management in many cases to tell us to do this, to let people know who we are, and to talk about ourselves. And could not be more against that than I do. I believe I am a journalist. I believe I am a reporter and an anchor. I am telling the news. I'm telling you what's going on. I don't want to give my opinion because I'm not supposed to have one. I'm old school in that way. And a lot of TV, especially, it's becomes, well, you are a personality. And in some jobs, that is how it is. You are hired for your personality, and you're supposed to be giving your opinions. But not even more so than that. It's taking a picture of your family, taking a picture of your dog, showing where you're going tonight.
There are some news people who are doing that,
well,
correct?
And we're being told to do that. Our management is telling us to do that. And I have a really hard time with that, because Laura Behnke on television, as the reporter, you don't need to know anything about me if you don't know who I am. And I have a really hard time. I'm very private. So it's navigating, in our television case, of management wanting us to let everybody know everything about us, and doing it in a way that I'm comfortable with, and showing personality, and doing that to an extent, but also keeping up that wall of, I don't know you people. So, you know, there's some things that are private. And
although we emphasize to students today that there's no expectation of privacy.
On social media, there isn't, but I still believe that there is, and I believe that there should be. And you do need to know everything that you put on social media. I mean, think about it. Would I say this on air? Am I comfortable enough saying this on air so that I would then tweet it? You know, and I think that you have to know anything that you put on the internet, no matter how many times you delete a tweet, it lives forever. Somebody took a screen grab of it. It is in the archives. It's cached. It will always be there. So yes, that in that regard, that there is no privacy, but that's what you put out there. You have a choice of what you want to put out there.
Yeah, you have to be your own best editor. Yeah. And I think your comment as far as guidelines is good and important for all of us here, that would I say it on the air, or would I say it in public to somebody, and that's something to keep in mind. When we talk about this social media and the websites and so on, what about the rush to be first? And again, management may be pushing some of us to be the first with a story when we're not sure we have all the facts. You deal with material on the web a lot. Yeah. How much of a push, how much pressure is there for that?
To be quite honest, I don't feel the pressure, and if there is, maybe I'm just ignorant of it. And a lot of the stories I cover primarily aren't quite as breaking news of stories, because it's a magazine cycle. It's once a week, and we're kind of looking at the larger landscape of an issue or a bigger picture. There are times where I go down. There's been 2 instances this year where the story of trying to break news, this Duke story, which unfortunately I brought up 3 times, and Saryville, which is one that many of you might be familiar with the hazing incident in central South Jersey. They sent me down there for the day. We kind of broke a little bit of news, but I didn't really quite feel the pressure to tweet anything out for a couple reasons. Mainly, I think the general rule of thumb with Twitter is this something that you would publish or say on the air? Is this something you'd comfortable with your boss seeing and my editor seeing and knowing that it's 1,000% true? And also, for me, I think because I'm a little bit more of a generalist and cover a lot of different things, I don't feel like my Twitter account is any kind of like authoritative voice on anything, which I know a lot of editors or management look for, you know, your social media brand. And I don't know if I exactly have a brand. So With that said, my Twitter account is sporadic. I don't tweet very much. I don't tweet with much authority. Maybe I need to get better at it, but it's kind of something, it's very, it's a third-hand thought for me. It's, you know, I think of who am I talking to, what am I putting for my print or web story, and then maybe what am I putting on social media.
Now, you're involved in coverage of this Greg Hardy story to a certain degree, and to remind everybody, he is the former Carolina player who was charged with domestic abuse. The accuser wouldn't testify because there was apparently some type of financial settlement, and now he's reinstated, and controversial signing by Dallas. What's your view of coverage of this story so far, and where do you think it's heading for us?
It's a very complex and nuanced story. In September, right around the time that, right before he was put on the exempt list, we really dove into it for the magazine. We were looking, we kind of had a good break on it early. We were working on this other project, domestic violence. Long story short, I went down to Carolina and was really in talks with the woman, the victim in this case, and her attorney, and we were trying to get her to speak. And I think a large reason I was put on it is, and I've been on the sexual assault beat this year, is I can't say it's not because I'm a woman and because I bring a different perspective to it. We covered it as well as we could have. We put out a pretty big story on it, and then, you know, the story kind of went away until now. And I think what bothers me the most with the coverage was this incident where what we learned about North Carolina law is that it's really insanely fluky, and he was found guilty by a bench judge, a really respected, Harvard-educated bench judge, with no doubt in her mind that said that he's guilty. But North Carolina has this, I don't want to call it a loophole because it's a law, but you can appeal any bench trial and go to a jury. So he's guilty in my mind by law, but he has a right to a jury as he's an American citizen, and he went to a settlement, like you said, with Nicole Holder, the victim. Anyway, the long story short is what I'm trying to get at is that a lot of the people jumped on this headline, Nicole Holder is missing. Where is Nicole Holder? She's gone, she's fled. They found pictures of her. Here she is in Grand Central Station. Here she is shopping, and didn't quite get the nuances of, look, it's a settlement. Of course she can't talk.
Well, isn't that one of the problems with coverage of these types of stories, that very often the women who come forward become, you know, further victims because people either don't believe them or don't feel they're being aggressive enough in pursuing it, and that's a very difficult decision for a woman to make, to come forward knowing there'll be this cascade of publicity.
When I cover this story, I think my biggest takeaway is a lot of times we say, how would women not testify? You have to be strong. I understand completely why women would not want to testify, because not only did this woman brave enough to go and share her story in front of this bench trial, she was slut-shamed. She was, you know, they brought up that you were doing coke at the club, you were doing this. It's humiliating. And then to come and be in the public eye and have to go through that again, it's the way we treat victims in the society. It's awful. And so the re-victimization is a huge issue, and that's a clear example of it in the Hardy case.
And I think having women actually covering this has helped in a way, because we see that. Not that all male reporters are sexist or, you know, don't get that. That's an unfair statement. But the perspective that we do have, and understanding, you know, that seeing the way women continue to be victimized as they come forward. I hope in this insane whirlwind year that the NFL has had, that even just a little bit of a female perspective has helped in some way.
Where is the sports media profession and women's role in it going to be 5 years from now? And the second part of the question is, your daughter, your niece, should they be wanting to work in this profession? Kelly?
It's hard to say where it's going to be 5-10 years because of the statistics we referenced earlier, that I would have thought we would have been a lot farther than we are now. But to your second point, yes, definitely. I mean, as much as we're talking about the critical issues in sports journalism and some of the obstacles we face as women, the flip side of it is it's a wonderful career. I mean, you know, every day is a different day. We get to travel the world, we get to travel the country, we get to tell great stories. You know, it is it's a joy. I mean, even covering the difficult stories, just being able to make a difference by writing about, you know, domestic violence, you know, in terms of educating people. So yes, I would encourage my daughter, if she ever gets out of the Disney princess stage, to go into you know, sports and sports journalism, because it's a wonderful life. It was a charmed career, you know, and you know, and I think strong women like the two women next to me, you know, will continue to make a difference and hopefully better, you know, make the environment better for future journalists.
Laura, where are we headed?
That's a very good question. And I think it's very hard to answer that, not only from the female perspective, but just the journalism perspective in general. I can't tell you how we're going to be covering sports and news, male or female, in 5 years. I mean, things have changed in the 13 years since I've been in this business so drastically. And where we fit in, I'm not sure. The trend in television is scaring me quite a bit. And I hope that enough competent, capable women continue to come into it and continue to try and fight for those jobs. And I do know that there's always ebbs and flows. And I'm just hoping right now we're kind of in a weird, definitely low point that we can come out of. And if enough women continue, who are serious about it, continue to do this, that will prevail.
Emily, you have the last word on this question.
That doesn't seem right.
For the moment.
Yeah, no, I think Kelly and Laura both, I have no idea what the future holds. I think people always need to get news. It's just a matter of how they're going to get news. And right now, there seems like there's more opportunities than possible, that are possible, you know, with different outlets and different mediums that we don't even know about yet. You know, there's going to be a sports writer with an Apple credential. Who knows? At the same time, it's really going to redefine what we see as journalism, and kind of, it's an exciting and scary future, but I would encourage every woman or male to want to be a part of it. And if you have a hunger for journalism and telling interesting stories and important stories and fun stories and sad stories, you should get along for the ride.
So it's not just our children and our nieces and nephews, it's all of these guys out here, right? They should be seriously interested in it and develop their skills as well, right?
And be serious. Like, you have to be serious. I especially in TV, I do see a lot of people who come in for internships are interested, and they think, oh, I just want to be on TV. Oh, I just want to do this. I get to watch sports for a living. Okay, that's not what it is. I mean, it is, but it isn't. And you have to be serious and have a passion and want to do it, because this is a hard business. No matter what medium you are in, this is tough. There are so many people who want these jobs. So do it if this is what you love and what you can't imagine doing anything else.
Special thanks to Dave Kaplan at the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center for hosting the panel. I'm Marc Rosenweig from all of us at Montclair State University. Thanks for watching Carpe Diem.